All right. Well, thank you all for joining us this evening. My name is May Matcham. I work at the Oak Ridges Marine Land Trust, and one of my favorite parts of my job is getting to help lead these webinars and organize these webinars. Any kind of the sort of public-facing educational programming, whether that's our guided walks or online virtual stuff like this, is always sort of the highlight of my job. I love getting to help connect people with nature. And I'm really excited about this particular presentation tonight. I think it's going to be really excellent. So I'm going to start off with a land acknowledgement, and we're going to talk a little bit about the work that the Land Trust does before I hand things over to my friend Emma over here. I'll just be 1 second here. So thank you for joining us today. We acknowledge that Indigenous peoples have had and continue to have presence and deep connection with the lands on and near the Oak Ridges Moraine, a part of what is known to Indigenous peoples of North America as Turtle Island. These lands are the meeting place of two treaties, the lands of the Mississaugas of the Credit and those of the Chippewas of Georgina Island, Rama, and Beausoleil, the Mississaugas of Alderville, Curve Lake, Hiawatha, and Scugog Island. These are the First Nations of the Williams Treaty. We would like to thank them and other Indigenous peoples for sharing this land with us. We acknowledge that Indigenous peoples have been subjected to colonial oppression and injustice, which continues to this day. We acknowledge that the first steps to reconciliation is recognizing Indigenous peoples and their inherent right to the land. We will continue to create a better future for our relationship with Indigenous peoples and the land. The Oak Ridges Marine Land Trust endeavors to honor the land and its treaties by ensuring a healthy ecosystem which thrives forever. And we will recognize that working together with Indigenous peoples to include ecological traditional knowledge systems moves us towards an equitable and sustainable future. So what does the Oak Ridges Marine Land Trust do? So 90% of the moraine, which is this big geographical landform all through southern Ontario that goes from the south shores of Rice Lake out by Port Hope all the way to the Niagara Escarpment, about 160 kilometers. About 90% of it is privately owned, so it's vulnerable to development. So we work with landowners to help protect important habitats across the moraine. We have 68 different properties that we protect, which totals over 5,000 acres. We use a number of tools to help protect land. Land trusts are a type of organization, a type of nonprofit charitable organization that can acquire land outright or interest in land through things like conservation easements to help conserve that land and the biodiversity which depends on it. So some of these properties have been donated to us or have been purchased, and other ones will have conservation easements on it. So the majority of the properties we protect, somebody might still live there or might even farm part of that property. But under Canadian law, part of it is set aside to be protected as habitat. And that land is protected forever under law. It's protected in perpetuity. We can't change our mind in 10 years and decide to put up a strip mall. The current owner, if they sell it, the next person who purchases it can't get rid of that easement. It is protected forever. So it's a really amazing tool to help protect these important places, particularly around the GTA and in southern Ontario, where already so much of the landscape has been developed. So we contribute to the federal government's goal of protecting 30% of land by 2030. We do educational programming like this to help connect people with nature. We've been out to a lot of community events this spring so far, things like the Maple Syrup Festival on Richmond Hill, and we just did the York Region Envirothon at Bruce's Mills. We were at an Earth Day tree planting event out there too. And we have a lot of really great both in-person and virtual events coming up over the next few weeks and the next few months that we'll talk about in a little bit. We help support climate change resiliency. Some of the best ways to combat climate change are by protecting these habitats and by protecting biodiversity. And with your support, we help protect ecologically significant lands on and near the moraine. One of the main tools we use is something called the Ecological Gifts Program. That's through the federal government, through the Canada Revenue Agency. And that gives really amazing tax incentives to landowners who want to either donate or put an easement on ecologically significant land. And that's one of the main ways, especially around the GTA where we're based, where the cost of land and real estate is so high that we're able to protect so much of the landscape is through through the tax breaks offered by this program. And we also do a lot of legacy giving. So a lot of the the properties we receive, people leave to us, and a lot of the funding we receive as well, people have left for us in their wills as part of their legacy. One really cool project that we're involved with right now is called the Kirtland's Warbler Habitat Restoration Initiative. It's based in Northumberland County out by Ganaraska Forest. We have two different restoration sites out there, and we're restoring this lost oak pine habitat. It's this habitat depends on natural cycles of forest fire as well as the cultural burns that Indigenous peoples have practiced throughout this landscape for countless generations in order to sustain that habitat, in order for the cones of species like jack pine and red pine to open and the seeds to germinate. Unfortunately, after the arrival of European colonizers, those practices were suppressed and forest fires more broadly were suppressed. So species like the Kirtland's warbler, this songbird here that only breeds around the Great Lakes region, they depend entirely on this habitat. And by the early 70s, there was only about 200 pairs of them left on Earth, actually. They were that endangered. Thankfully, through restoration work, including controlled burns in Michigan, their numbers are way up. And they're off the endangered species list in the US, but they're still very endangered in Ontario because there's not a lot of habitat for them. So we're trying to bring back the habitat for this bird. It's going to benefit a lot of other species, rare species, species at risk, things like the eastern hognose snake, the common nighthawk, the whippoorwill, the red-headed woodpecker, a lot of other species that have declined dramatically in the past few hundred years and in the past few decades also depend on this habitat. So sometime in the fall, we're going to have around November a volunteer shrub planting event out there at that site in Northumberland. And there may be opportunities as well for people interested in collecting the seeds of native plants. Here are a few of the events we have coming up over the next little while. We have a couple of really great webinars coming up this month. We have one about orchids of Ontario and the Oak Ridges Moraine. That's a topic we've never really explored before, but something that I really love. I'm a huge plant person. If anyone is interested in coming out to our Starcliffe Nature Reserve in Schaumburg, Ontario, out sort of by Vaughan, King City area, we have a garlic mustard pull on May 27th, where we're going to be doing some manual removal of this invasive species. And later in the month, on May 28th, we have a webinar all about the conservation of the western chorus frog, which is a tiny amphibian which is experiencing some pretty dramatic population declines across much of Ontario and Quebec. I'm excited to have our second annual queer ecology hike that I'm going to be leading in June for Pride Month. And then in July, we have a double header with the butterflies, dragonflies, and damselflies walk at our another nature reserve in Schaumburg, the Maple Cross Nature Reserve, as well as our moth night. We're going to have Andrea Schneider, who was the national coordinator for Moth Week for Canada, who helped lead our moth night last night, is going to be back for this. So I'm really excited to have Andrea back and to have another moth night. That was one of my favorite events that we did last year. So I'm just going to give a quick introduction here to Emma before I hand it over to her and let her start her presentation. So Emma Keeley Sweeney is a passionate gardener, an amateur naturalist, amateur mycologist, a yogi, a nanny, and earth lover. Currently based in Montreal. She's really happy to have the opportunity to create a balcony garden each summer and to bear witness to the growth of seeds and insects and creatures that the garden can bring, and finding some peace in the process. Emma and I have known each other for a very long time, over 10 years. So I'm really excited that I get to have Emma be our presenter tonight, and that I get to share her experiences with you. So if you want to take things over, I'll hand things over to you.
Thank you, Meg. Can you still hear me? All right.
Yeah, I
Okay,
can hear
great.
you.
Because I put my headphones on. And thank you. And hello, everybody. Thank you so much for coming. I am going to share my screen because I do have a PowerPoint to go with my webinar that we're going to be delving into today. So let's see here. Dun, 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 dun. Okay, does that look all good?
Yeah, that looks great.
Okay, so well, let's get started. I would like to just start out by introducing myself a little bit. My name is Emma Sweeney. I was born in London, Ontario. And I was extremely blessed to grow up with a woman who possessed the greenest of thumbs. And I am talking about my mom, Rosalind, who I think is here tonight, but I'm not sure. But if you are, hi, Mom. Yeah, my mom's love for gardening and landscaping is a part of my life that really stands out to me as the catalyst of so many of my interests as an adult. I feel so lucky that in my childhood, I was always surrounded by the beauty of a big garden and just a glimpse of what that provides. In our backyard, we had rabbits, every insect imaginable, birds, bees, butterflies, caterpillars, just creatures galore. My mom and dad had herbs and flowers and vegetables. Here is actually a beautiful painting of my childhood home, and there's a picture of my mom and I. And here's just a couple more pictures. That's my mom and I in front of her beautiful magnolia tree, and just some other absolutely beautiful things that were in her garden. So this experience forged within me a strong connection to nature from a very young age. In my later teens and early 20s, I would say goodbye to the big city every summer in favor of the remote wilderness for my tree planting job. And although that work would end around August, I typically wouldn't return to the city until September. All this to say, I never really had time for a garden up until 3 years ago when my boyfriend Chris and our dog Hank and I moved to Montreal. The balcony garden is humble. It makes the non horticulturally inclined ask why, because your yield may only provide for one small salad, or in fact, nothing at all as you start to learn the basics and adapt to the unique needs of gardening above ground. But if you have the will, there is a way to utilize space in ways that you never could have expected. So, whether you're 2 or 20 stories up, tonight we are going to dive into the basics of seed starting, species selecting, and creativity with containers to bring the joy of gardening anywhere. So, the move to Montreal with Chris and Hank would be my first ever apartment I wasn't sharing with any roommates. We have a small balcony, which I have included some pictures of here. That is my dog, Hank. He's actually in the exact same spot right now, enjoying the beautiful evening. So yeah, we have this small balcony in the back. There are stairs that go down to a small landing, and there is a backyard that we do have access to half of, but it definitely is quite neglected. The soil is mostly clay. It's very, very hard, and it's very overrun with super invasive weeds and cat pee and poop. So it would be a huge effort for me to restore this yard to a place where things would be growing well in the ground. So although I do have access to it, I do prefer my containers. Um,
Emma,
so down
I'm sorry to interrupt, but people are asking in the chat if is there any way to move the Oak Ridges Marine logo that's in my
Yeah,
presentation?
hold
Maybe
on. Maybe I could just swipe it
might
away.
not be
Oh,
possible. Oh,
there
that's
we
a
go.
little
There we
bit
go.
better. Yeah, thank you.
Let's see how small I can make it. Oh
We don't
no.
want that. Yeah.
Wait, what did I do? Hold on here. Hold on. What happened? Hmm. What did I do? Is that better? Am I back?
That's much better. Thank you.
Okay. Yes, thank you. I wasn't sure if only I could see that or if everyone could see it.
Yeah, that looks a lot better. Thank you.
Okay, but okay, let me just actually I'm gonna put it up here because oh, now it's gone.
Perfect.
Amazing. Okay. Let me see. Yeah. So down in our yard, our shared yard, we have a mix of sun and shade, which is great. And on the landing, it's a mix as well. And then on the stairs and in the balcony that you see pictured, this balcony is full sun all day long. It gets extremely hot out there. So I really appreciate the access to shade because it makes it be able to like experiment a little bit more, which I can appreciate. Um, so the past 3 years of living here, my garden has been a lot of trial and error. When we first moved here, it was September, so I didn't have time to even start a garden that first year. In the second year, I tried a pickling variety of cucumbers, but I didn't really, I don't know, I was just seeing what would happen. I didn't have the right size container. I totally crowded it. I didn't get a single cucumber, nothing happened. And that was kind of the only thing I tried planting. And then last year, I tried again with cucumbers and tomatoes, but I wanted to have herbs and flowers. So I started sweet pea seeds, and I actually ended up buying some herbs from just the grocery store that I potted up. And I definitely had a lot more fun, like when I kind of let go of expectations and like rules that I thought I had to follow about gardening. So last year I did harvest enough cucumbers to make a small jar of pickles that were absolutely delicious. Um, However, I did over fertilize my sweet peas. So, as you can see in this picture, and I will explain more of the chaos of this second picture, I didn't get any flowers. I just got really strong green vines, which I was like, that was great too. They were very, very beautiful. And then, kind of near the end of the summer, I had a bit of a critter problem. And I never really figured out what the critter was. Like, I don't know if it was squirrels or a raccoon or something else, but they dug everything and tipped over my containers and caused chaos and a huge mess. And whenever I would put it back and like try to fix it, and this happened on three separate occasions when I would fix like the chaos, the creature would come and poop on my doorstep. Maybe in retaliation, maybe it was just a coincidence, but I was able to find comedy in this as my harvest was over and I was just enjoying the green space that I had created. And that is when something absolutely amazing happened in my garden. So, my best friend, oh, there's my pickles. I'll pause for you to enjoy those. So, I had my best friend, Sir Matthews, here for a lovely visit. And one day, after walking and shopping and enjoying each other's company in beautiful Montreal, we came home to rest. And Sarah actually fell asleep on the wicker couch that's on the balcony. And I was down on the steps near my herb container, just reading and enjoying a beautiful day. And out of the corner of my eye, I caught like a flicker. And when I turned to look, I saw a beautiful black swallowtail butterfly. At first, I thought that the butterfly had come to enjoy the nectar of my cucumber and tomato plants that were still putting out some flowers, but she didn't seem interested. As a matter of fact, she spent most of her time fluttering around me and fluttering around the herbs, and I couldn't really understand. I felt flattered. I was that this butterfly wanted to fly near me. And that's when I really started watching her fly and hover. And then something I didn't entirely understand in that moment, which is kind of what you can see in this picture here. I do have a more clear picture a bit later on, but she bent her body in sort of this J, like the bottom of the abdomen, thorax. I'm not sure the terminology, bent down, and it really captivated me. I was so curious. Um, so I had to know more. I had to go and look up like what this strange dance was and what was happening. And what I learned that I had been witnessing delighted me in a way that was visceral from my toes to the crown of my head, like a buzz went through my entire body when I realized that what was happening was this butterfly was laying eggs. And so I ran out to take this picture that you see as the second picture. And if you look right in the middle there, you can see it, this yellowish white little dot that is her beautiful butterfly egg. And when I went and observed this, I saw that there already were tiny, tiny little caterpillars on the dill and the parsley, like teeny, teeny, tiny. They were only about 2 centimeters long. They were black with white dots and an orange stripe. And recently I've learned actually that orange is the universal insect sign of foul taste. So don't eat any orange insects. They are not going to taste good. Um, so I decided in this moment that I wanted to try to raise these caterpillars to butterflyhood. I set out to make a terrarium. So I just thrifted like a large, medium large glass container and I put a piece of tin foil on top that I just poked holes in. I wonder, let's see. Yep, you can see there. There's my terrarium. Um, so every day I cleaned it and filled it with fresh dill and fresh parsley because in caterpillarhood, they typically, at the early stages of their life, only want to eat the plant of which their egg was laid upon. So if it was laid on a piece of parsley, they want to eat the parsley. If it was laid on the dill, they want to eat the dill. The caterpillars molt 5 times in their lifetime to accommodate their changing size. Basically, what that is like a shedding of their skin, resulting in a new form. The caterpillars go from tiny black things with their white dots and orange line to big black and white stripe with yellow dots, and then a few more times to their final form of caterpillarhood, which is fat and green and yellow and black. They establish a very unique defense mechanism of a hidden antenna that pops out when they feel threatened, and it emits a foul odor that I was unfortunate enough to experience firsthand while handling the caterpillars to move them out of the terrarium when I would clean it and add more fresh herbs. It's the smell is something like a really stinky foot smell and a really stinky cheese smell mixed together. Like the message is clear. It is not something that you want to eat. So I had about 3 caterpillars in my terrarium when something kind of unexpected happened, or maybe like now in hindsight, knowing that I have a sensitive heart was expected. But I started to feel guilty. I felt guilty that I took this creature from its natural environment and that this life that I was subjecting them to was unkind and not good enough. And this guilt overtook me to the point that that night I took my caterpillars, I put them back because I just was like, you know what? I'll just let them have their lives outside and everything will be okay. But I went to sleep that night just like with my head full of confusion. I didn't know if it was the right choice. Was it naive to place my human emotions on these creatures whose only drive was to eat and eat and eat and grow and grow and grow until it was time to make a chrysalis and become a butterfly? They had no concept of missing the outdoors or being caged or observed. And in the morning, I had my answer. When I went out to go check, my all my caterpillars were gone, surely eaten up by a predator who was delighted to find such a delicious morsel. And my heart was totally broken, and I learned a very valuable lesson in that moment, which is that this natural world isn't a place for my big feelings and human emotions. It really is just a place where these creatures are going from caterpillar to butterfly, and that's the only goal. They're not missing their plant because I brought them into my terrarium. So the next time, like, luckily, I had an abundance of eggs and caterpillars on my plant. So it gave me a chance to try again. And I decided that I would do a bit of a compromise and I would only bring one caterpillar in to attempt to raise to butterflyhood. Um, and it was amazing. I watched my caterpillar go through all of its molting and eventually spin its silk, which is like a really thin piece of silk that they use to then hold their chrysalis to the stick or whatever it is they decide to place it on. Um, and the day that I woke up to this beautiful butterfly in this terrarium was absolutely one of the best days of my life. And when I released my butterfly into the world, although my lesson was still fresh in my mind, I made sure to tell this butterfly, I love you, before she flew off to perform her essential work as a native pollinator. And this, my friends, is the exact point of my long story about my relationship to this butterfly, which is just that your garden does not have to be about yield. It doesn't even have to be about aesthetic. It's just a symbol of our ability to participate in the natural world, especially for us city dwellers, that we can maybe feel a bit disconnected to. Your garden allows you the space to see how you have the ability to play a crucial role in your native ecosystem, and anyone can do it. So now let's talk about the first steps in creating your balcony garden. There is Hank with the butterfly. So I want to talk about, well, actually, I'm going to go back and then bring that up in a minute. So my first advice is to just take a look at the space that you are planning on making your garden in. How high are you? Is it very windy, extremely sunny, quite shady? Answering these questions about your space will help you decide what kind of container and species are best for you. For example, like a balcony in an apartment 20 stories high will have very different needs than my space, for example, which is a second floor balcony. The hot sun on a high balcony and the wind, like, probably means that you need to water a lot more often than suggested. Another question you may ask yourself is, do you want to start your garden from seeds or from seedlings, which is like a baby plant, or even an already mature plant from a garden center? There's so many ways to start your container garden. But before we go ahead, like on any more of that, my number one advice of getting started is to determine your gardening zone. So, a gardening zone is also known as a plant hardiness zone, are geographical areas that share similar average annual minimum winter temperatures, which helps determine which plants are likely to survive the winter in a particular region. This is really essential for if you're planting annuals, which is a plant that is supposed to come back year after year. So Montreal is considered to be in zone 6A, while Toronto is considered to be in zone 6B. You can determine your zone by a quick Google search, and this knowledge can help us plan our garden, especially if you're planting annuals, like I said. And it kind of helps you get an idea of what like advice is best suited to you. I find, I see a lot of gardening content on Instagram and stuff that is really amazing and helpful, but some of the advice is more tailored to like the southern United States or just somewhere that actually does not have a lot, or England, even like places that don't have a lot in common with my zone. So that's definitely important to keep in mind when you're getting started. Um, so but don't let it hold you back from experimenting, because gardening can sometimes seem to have a lot of rules. But don't worry, there's no penalty for not following them. No, as my yoga teacher Susan Bremner says, no one's going to jump you in the parking lot later for not following the rules. It's totally going to be okay, and have fun and enjoy experimenting. The thing that I find knowing my zone most helpful for is seed starting. So another thing your zone tells you is when the last frost date is, which is very, very important. Typically, young plant seedlings, even like some mature plants, can't survive an intense frost. So it's important to avoid. The general rule of thumb for most zone 6 gardeners is to keep seedlings inside until May 24 weekend. And after that, your risk of frost is extremely low, but still pay attention to your weather alerts because it can happen. And if it does, just make sure you bring stuff in if you can. And if you can't bring stuff in, you can cover your seedlings or your plants with towels, blankets, just like give them a little bit of protection from that frost. So if you do start seeds indoors, you want to keep in mind that you'll have to allow them to go through what is known as a hardening off process before transplanting outside. So I guess I'm just going to skip ahead and show just a couple little seedlings. Like, these are your little baby seedlings that will need to go through a hardening off process. So if you see the ones planted in cups, those are cucumbers and tomatoes, and that is typically the age and size of a plant that would go through outside hardening off. So the reason that you do this is because slowly exposing your seedlings to outdoor elements like kind of interrupts the predictability of the life they've lived inside, because outdoor conditions are so much more unpredictable than your sunny windowsill or wherever you're starting your seeds inside. You can even start some small hardening off actions as soon as your seedlings are up from the soil, like gently running your hand over them to simulate a gentle breeze. Otherwise, hardening off doesn't occur until about a week before you want to move your plants outside. You can start with about 30 minutes to an hour outside in the morning, kind of at a cooler time of the day, out of direct sunlight. And then the next day, you can do an hour. and then the next day another hour, maybe a little more sun. The point is to gradually introduce your seedlings to direct outdoor sunlight. In about a week, your seedlings will have developed their hardiness and will be ready to be transplanted. And so I'm sure a big question on everyone's minds are, what seeds should I choose? And it really is a fun question, and it really is up to the preference of the gardener. So, what do you want to do? Do you want to grow food? Do you want to support pollinators, or just bring some color or greenery to your space? This is another instance where knowing your zone can be helpful, just because there are certain plants better suited to certain zones. But I do want to just take a moment to stress the importance of native species. So, a native species is indigenous to a given region or ecosystem if its presence in that region is the result of only local natural evolution. So, it wasn't introduced by a person or an an animal or something. It's just something that occurs naturally in the environment. Native species are crucial because they form the foundations of healthy ecosystems. They support biodiversity, they provide essential food and shelter for wildlife, and they just contribute to the overall stability and resilience of natural environments. So, I have a couple key points here that I would like to read and share. So, supporting biodiversity and ecosystem function include native plants being at the base of the food web. So, providing food and shelter for native animals, insects, and other organisms. Going on from that, it's a habitat for wildlife. So, native plants, through their evolved relationship with local wildlife, offer the best habitat for native species, including shelter, nesting sites, and breeding grounds or egg laying. So pollinator support. Native plants are essential for supporting pollinators like bees, butterflies, and moths, which are vital for plant reproduction and ecosystem health. So keystone species. Some native plants are keystone species, meaning they have a disproportionately large impact on their ecosystem compared to other species. And another amazing thing about native plants is their resilience to climate change. So native species are adapted to local climates and conditions, making them more resilient to climate change impacts than non-native species. And some other ecological benefits include improved soil health. Native plants with their deep root systems help stabilize soil, prevent erosion, and improve water filtration. And water quality. Native plants can help filter pollutants and improve water quality in streams and rivers. And on top of all of that, they also provide natural pest control. So, native plants have evolved natural defenses against pests and diseases, reducing the need for chemical interventions. And yeah, in this webinar really is just about kind of getting started in the basics. I'm not really going to be talking about pests or how to get rid of them or even really fertilizing because those are just things I don't do in my garden just out of a personal preference. So I have collected a list of native perennials. Now these perennials are native to Montreal, but because of our overlapping zones, there are a lot of these plants that are native in Ontario as well. So I'll just give everyone a minute to look here, but this webinar will be available afterwards on YouTube. So if you do want to come back and revisit this list, you will be able to do that. So these are semi-shade and shade perennials. These are the native perennials that enjoy full sun. And yep, it shows you what attractions for wildlife they provide. And then some perennials that like sun and semi-shade. I'll kind of just give that a minute, but I will move on from this. And if you would like, also, I can totally send you this list if you would be interested in having it from me. So yes, there are my little seeds. So an amazing place in your cities to get seeds and connect with fellow gardeners is at your city's local seed library. What is a seed library? There is an amazing seed library in Montreal called the Atwater Seed Library, and they, on their website, describe a seed library as Seed libraries are not only a response to losses in agrobiodiversity, but they're a response to the corporatization of seeds. So you might not know this, but three companies, Monsanto, DuPont, and Syngenta, control 53% of the global commercial market for seeds. The world's largest seed company, Monsanto, now controls 27% of the seed market. That is intense. That's a lot. Seed libraries function like regular libraries in that anyone can take out seeds. Library users are then asked to check some of the seeds back into the library at the end of the growing season. Most seed libraries emphasize bringing open pollinated heirlooms back into the public domain. So, native, non genetically modified plants just back into the hands of the public, which is amazing. Um, so it's an estimated that in 2015 there were over 340 seed libraries in North America, 27 of which are located in Canada. There are three other seed libraries in Montreal: the Concordia Seed Library, the Côte Saint Luc Seed Library, and Pharmaseed, which is a medicinally focused seed library, which is amazing. Um, and I know that there are a lot of people from Ontario and Toronto in this webinar. I did look into it. There does seem to be a seed library initiative in Toronto that is available at a lot of public library locations. But I did reach out to someone from there asking if it was still active, and I didn't hear back from them. But I'm not going to take that to mean that the seed library doesn't exist anymore. Um, all that to say, just have a quick little look up to see if there's a seed library in your city. And if there isn't, I would love to talk more with you about starting one in your city if that is something that interests you. And while we're speaking about this, I mentioned a bit earlier about a reason for seed libraries being a response to a decline in agrobiodiversity. So I just would like to read for you one more thing from the Atwater Seed Library website about the decline in agrobiodiversity, which is that in the last 100 years, approximately 90 to 95% of fruit and vegetable varieties have gone extinct. Many scientists believe that this decline in agrobiodiversity threatens the whole world's food security. In North America, most of the historically documented varieties of seeds have disappeared. For instance, 86% of the 7,098 apple varieties described between the 100-year period of 1804 and 1904 are completely gone. This apparent decline in agrobiodiversity is not limited to the Western Hemisphere, but rather is a global pattern that has become increasingly evident over the last several decades. For example, in the 1940s, over 10,000 wheat varieties were available in China, but already by the 1970s, only 1,000 remained. Yes, it just is interesting that our relationship to seeds is, a bit more complicated than I think I ever even realized. And so I think that visiting your local seed library and learning more from resources like this are important for anyone who is interested in gardening and the environment and agrobiodiversity. So to move on, starting a garden from seed is really fun and a great way to experiment, as you can see from all my little seed starting experiments. But it's completely not necessary. You can buy seedlings or already mature plants and herbs from your local garden centers, Canadian Tire, Home Depot, even your grocery store. There's a lot of places to buy plants and seedlings. And there's lots of things that can be used to start seeds. As you saw in my little picture here, I have some toilet paper rolls, red Solo cups, just little containers from Canadian Tire. Um, Pretty much anything that can hold soil and provide drainage can be used. If you want to use something you already have, my first advice is to look in your fridge. Empty yogurt cups, containers, egg cartons, those are just like a few things that come to mind that are probably in your fridge right now that you can use to start seeds. I also have a friend who swears by seed starting in red Solo cups. That is the amazing Robin Zanetti, who might be here. I'm not sure. Who is from Ontario but lives in Smithers and has an amazing microgreen um, farm and business called Righteous Paths Produce. But Robin and her husband Kyle swear by seed starting in red solo cups. So I had to give it a try, and I can confirm that it is a great way to start seeds. Um, so, something really important to consider when making a recycled seed starter is your drainage holes. Your seedlings, your soil, they need to have drainage or it's going to get wet and moldy and yucky in there. So, typically, when mold occurs on starting seeds, it's not a big deal and it could be easily eradicated. But when just starting out, you can try to avoid it altogether. However, if you do find mold on your seedlings, um, it typically is because your seed starting station doesn't have good airflow, and it actually happened to me this year. A bunch of my seedlings grew mold, but I read that a good home remedy is spraying them with hydrogen peroxide because it kills the mold, but it isn't harmful to your seedlings. And then the other thing I did was I just turned on the fan in the room to like get the air circulating a bit better. And after all that, I never had mold again. So it and my seedlings are looking amazing. So it is definitely possible to move on from mold. It's not the end of your garden if you see mold on your seedlings. Um, so once you've selected your containers, it's time to fill them with soil. I personally reuse my soil from last year. So I have lots of containers outside, also full of soil, and I just thought, why not? So if you have access to that, I highly recommend reusing your soil. You might get some mystery seedlings. That happened to me. I had a couple mystery seedlings, usually invasive plants. But it really is like a good visual example of how quickly and easily invasive things can spread, and how as soon as like temperatures get a bit warmer, they get some water, they get more comfortable, they come quick. So, yes, that was intense, like picking out all of the random seeds. And now that I'm a bit more experienced, I'm able to recognize them a bit more quickly. Let's see. So since I did that, like took soil from outside, the soil was damp. So when I planted my seeds, I did not water them. The soil was already damp. And I waited a couple days for that to dry out before I watered them again. I find that the best way to check if your seeds are ready for water is if you have your containers or you have your seedlings in something like the red solo cup or these green containers that you see here, you can pick them up. And if it feels really, really light, it needs a drink. But if it feels like it has some weight to it, like it's heavy, it probably is okay. Another good way to check is to just stick your finger in there about an inch. And if your finger comes out clean, it needs to be watered. But if your finger comes out covered in dirt, it's probably okay for another day or two. Be mindful of watering, but just know that plants are very resilient, even in the seedling stage. So don't worry too much about making mistakes because they are typically easily rectified. Let's see. So these are just some other pictures of my garden situation and setup. So once your seedlings have reached an appropriate age of maturity, which can look different for all plants, it's time to start the hardening off, which is what I kind of talked about earlier. So just hardening off is the transition to preparing to planting out, which means transitioning to a bigger container. I'm very lucky that my boyfriend Chris works at a restaurant and they receive a lot of their things in huge containers like mayonnaise and pickles, etc., etc. If you're growing food or herbs or anything that you'll be ingesting, it's very important that you make sure the containers that you're using to grow are food safe. So grow bags, for example, are is a container that's food safe, and most plastic containers that you buy at a store are. But it's important to check. So in the little recycling triangle, they all have a number. The food safe plastic numbers are 2, 4, and 5. So make sure that your container has one of those numbers before you plant out anything that you plan on ingesting. Since the containers I get from my boyfriend's work are all food safe, that it's a great place to get containers. So if you know someone who works at a restaurant or you feel like making a connection with restaurant employees or owners in your community, I highly recommend popping by a restaurant or cafe and asking if they have containers that you can take home. And so it's very important to add drainage holes to these containers as well. I do have a drill that I use, but you could use a hammer and a nail. You could use a screwdriver. Just please be careful when putting drainage holes in large containers. So, hardening off can be, oh, here's actually a good example on the left of a big pickle container that has my lavender. Um, hardening off can be beneficial for nursery plants as well. So, when we buy a plant or seedling, like as a seedling or an adult, we really don't know much about the life that it's lived and like adapted to. And regardless of what that life looked like, you're taking it into a completely new environment, and it might need some time just to adapt to that. So you can give them a few days, do sort of some light hardening off, and then plant it out and see how it goes. So before I kind of start to wrap things up here, I did want to suggest a couple of seedlings or plants that you can start in your garden this year for supporting our beautiful butterflies. So those are just some more pictures. That's actually right where I was sitting when I saw the butterfly for the first time. And those are my cucumber flowers, and that is just a beautiful um, root system that a tomato plant grew in a cup in my kitchen. Anyway, milkweed, the common milkweed, monarch butterflies need milkweed because this is their sole host plant. So, monarch caterpillars cannot survive without feeding on milkweed, and the adult butterflies need milkweed to lay their eggs. This unique relationship means that milkweed is crucial for the monarch butterfly's life cycle. Other flowers can definitely bring monarchs to your garden, but the best way to support them is by planting milkweed. And yeah, that is where they'll lay their eggs and their babies will enjoy. And then the other plant is actually a family of plants known as the Umbrelliferae family. So the Umbrelliferae family includes plants like dill, parsley, fennel, wild carrot, celery, and cilantro. These plants are where the black swallowtail butterfly, which was the butterfly that I had the pleasure of experiencing, laid her egg. So you can see clearly in this picture the sort of J shape I was describing earlier. This is a butterfly in the process of laying eggs. So these plants that I just listed, I'll list them again: dill, parsley, fennel, wild carrot, celery, and cilantro create a beautiful habitat for black swallowtail butterflies. And so, the last thing that I wanted to discuss that I think is vital to add to your garden if you're interested in supporting pollinators is making a watering station for bees and butterflies and other insects. So, all of our beautiful pollinators that will be enjoying your garden will likely also be seeking a little rest and water. So, access to water is something that will keep insects coming back to your garden. For bees and butterflies, I like to put rocks in a shallow dish. It doesn't necessarily have to be shallow, but just any kind of dish, and add rocks and sticks and places for the insects to land and chill while they enjoy a drink of water. And you can put these in the sun and the shade just to give a little variety to our buddies. But yes, my last thing that I wanted to say is when it's time to plant out your seedlings that you have cultivated or bought or brought into your life in any way, it is time to practice one of the most beneficial challenges of gardening, in my opinion, which is relinquishing control. It's time for your plants to live their lives with our help, but on their terms. We can water them, fertilize them, speak to them, and love them. But at this point, anything can happen: bugs, storms, squirrels. And it's time for us to practice just being a part of it all, bearing witness, and taking it easy. But this is when the greatest garden magic can happen. your first harvest, your first butterfly, your first bees, watching the garden you planted come to life, contribute to biodiversity, grow, change, rot, and die, and then get to do it all again next year. And that is what I have for you folks tonight. I think that we are going to open it up to just some questions. And I just want to say thank you again so much to May for having me and putting this on. And I hope that you enjoyed my gardening story and maybe could learn something about starting your garden in a small space.
Yeah, thank you so much, Emma, for sharing that this evening. That was a really great presentation. Um, we had one person was in the chat was asking a little bit earlier about like the best species um, for caterpillars and sort of the bird
Mhm.
populations that those caterpillars help support. And
Mm.
yeah, we chatted a little bit about that. I know. If anyone here has ever read, like The Secret Life of Trees by Doug Tallamy, he talks about like native oaks can support over 900 different species of lepidopterids, so butterflies and moths. But in terms of wildflowers that people might have in their gardens, goldenrods are a really great choice for that. Over 80 different,
Mhm.
caterpillar species, different butterflies and moths can use goldenrods as their host plants, but just about any native plant that you can get is going to be
Mhm.
really excellent for supporting native pollinators and for supporting, butterflies and moths whose caterpillars, help support, populations of birds and all sorts of other animals that feed on them. I'll also say strawberries, members of the strawberry family are
Mhm.
excellent for that too. Things like boneset, Joe pie weed, yeah, members of the sunflower
Mhm.
family, all of those are all really great options.
Definitely.
Um,
Yeah.
so let's see. It looks like we have a question here that says about using the same soil twice um, for a pack of. I was told that you can use the same soil twice from one year to another um, for nutrients. Is that not true? Or for
I think
lack of nutrients?
I think like it just depends on what your goals are for your garden. So like if you were trying to grow like a tomato plant and you wanted to get a lot of tomatoes, or a cucumber plant and you wanted a lot of cucumbers, then exactly maybe I would not recommend using the same soil twice. But for me in my garden, just because I'm kind of just experimenting, I'm not really looking for a high yield. I think I've experience that it's okay, especially for the seeds starting. Like all of my seeds have started up amazingly, and I definitely have a lot of new containers this year that I will need to be getting new soil for. Actually, that does remind me of something I forgot to talk about that I wanted to, which is that a lot of cities do an event or a couple of days where they give out free soil and compost. There is one coming up in Montreal, I believe, on May 16th. So not this Friday, but next Friday, where you can go and get free soil and compost. And I know that Toronto does the same at a location in the East End. I forget exactly where, but I can find that information for whoever is interested and send it. But yeah, if you're looking for like a high yield, then maybe using the same soil twice isn't quite right for you. But if you're kind of just like having fun and experimenting, then it'll be okay. Seeds will start.
Yeah. I had another question, or somebody was asking whether it's bad to have a non-native thing on their balcony. And yeah, if I could share before I hand it over to you, just some of my thoughts on
Mhm.
that. I think, yeah, we're an organization, the Oak Ridges Marine Land Trust. We're trying to, promote native biodiversity, and a big chunk of this presentation is dedicated to, planting native species and how they can support pollinators and native insects, which help support birds and amphibians and mammals and everything that eats them. So there are definitely a lot of benefits to planting native species, and but I don't want to have like a value, sort of a value that goes along with everything non-native is bad. I
Mhm.
think your story about the black swallowtail is a great example of that. There's a lot of butterflies which have actually adapted to using non-native species that have been introduced as their
Hmm.
host plants. Things like the Baltimore checker spot and the black swallowtail, the wild indigo dusky-wing, all use introduced plants now as their host plants. So having non-native species like in your garden is not, it's not like a, doesn't make you a bad person is basically what I'm trying to say. And the only thing I would be cautious of is obviously not planting anything that's known to be invasive. Things like, goutweed and periwinkle, like avoid that at all costs. But just if it's something that's sort of it's like contained in your garden, it's not going to spread, it's not going to interfere with the local ecosystem. It can still be beneficial for native insects, pollinators, and things like that.
Totally. I could not have said it better myself. Like I personally do grow a lot of non-native but non-invasive species. So for example, the sweet peas. Like sweet peas are not a native species, but they're not invasive. So exactly what you said. Like I would just be cautious of making sure you're not planting species that are invasive because even when you plant an invasive species in a container, it really can and will still spread. So exactly like it's fun to get to know like the native species of the land you're on, and if you feel like you want to try growing them, like give it a try. But if like your heart is calling to the non-native non-invasive species, go for it.
I will say too, it's in the past, like I would say maybe 3 or 4 years, it's gotten so much easier to find, especially in like large urban centers, native plants at garden centers.
Yes.
I feel like when like back in like 2018, 2017, you'd only find like common milkweed, maybe like butterfly milkweed and like black-eyed
Hmm.
Susans, and it was like such a limited selection. But here in where I live, like I go to garden centers and oftentimes they have a whole section that's native species. I've seen like a garden center in Toronto where they're selling like Jack in the Pulpit and
Mm,
species that, you wouldn't expect to be in cultivation like that. So, and
totally.
I see it on a lot of like residential side streets. People are planting, blazing star and boneset,
Hmm.
um, even, like cardinal flower, white turtlehead, things like this. Bee balm is
Hmm.
another one. I see a lot of
Yeah,
Monarda in people's
totally.
gardens. So it's getting easier and easier to find this stuff.
Definitely. And yeah, they are beautiful. Like if what you are wanting to have and bring to your garden is just like a beautiful, lovely outdoor space, like you can definitely like access and experience and enjoy that beauty through native plants and species.
Perfect. Yeah, you said that really well.
Oh,
I
thank
think
you.
if there's no more questions, I think we might start to wrap up for the night. But um, yeah, I just want to thank you one more time. I had a really, really nice experience hearing about, yeah, your adventure in discovering this and sort of teaching yourself, how to do a garden in a small space like this. It's really inspiring, really encouraging that you, especially using so many like found materials, recycled containers and things like that. Like, I think
Hmm.
sometimes costs can be another like big barrier to doing this kind of stuff. But
Absolutely.
it's when you talk about seed libraries, um, there's organizations, like CD Saturdays. There were a lot of farmers
Hmm.
markets around Southern Ontario. I've seen it in Peterborough. I've seen it in Toronto, places like that where people will hand them out. I know some sort of like health food stores. Like we have a place called Karma Co-op in Toronto near where I live, where people do seed exchanges. A lot of, local horticultural societies, even Facebook groups, local plant
Hmm.
Facebook groups. There's a lot of interest in this stuff and a lot of people who are really keen to share their seeds and help.
Totally, yes. And thank you so much, May, for having me. And if anyone from this webinar would like to talk more about anything I discussed today, you can find me on Instagram at Pretty Lo-Fi, PrettyLofi. Or you can send me an email at emmakeelysweeney@gmail.com. And yeah, I hope to hear from some of you. And I just want to say thank you again so much to everyone who came.
Yeah, thank you so much. Everybody have a great night and enjoy your spring, enjoy
Yeah,
gardening, have fun with plants, and
exactly.
we'll see you at the next webinar.
Yep. All right. Thank you, everybody. Bye.
Bye.